Highlighted in Algeria is the progress that Algeria has made in recent years across various sectors, emphasizing the two countries' interest in advancing their bilateral partnership and building positive economic relations. Media sources have revealed the involvement of the current French Minister of Culture, Rachida Dati, in a hostile campaign against Algeria, being among the direct officials responsible for the broadcast by the French public television channel France 2 of the so-called investigation containing false allegations and misinformation with content hostile to Algeria. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stressed the need to fully implement the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, which is currently described as a de-escalation in firing without a complete halt. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First in our news, the president of the France-Algeria Association, Ms. Ségolène Royal, has highlighted in Algiers the progress that Algeria has made in recent years across various sectors, emphasizing the two countries' interest in advancing their bilateral partnership and building positive economic relations. Jamal Salmani has more details in this report.
Speaking at a press conference during the fourth day of her working visit to Algeria, Royal said she had met with companies, startups, and young people in training, noting that Algeria has changed significantly compared to her previous visit 10 years ago, describing her current visit as successful and fruitful. Royal emphasized that France must recognize Algeria's progress and take action if it wishes to remain a partner, noting that Algeria has diversified its partnerships and will not wait for France. She recalled that economic relations between the two countries have been almost suspended for 2 years, while underlining Algeria's clear willingness to maintain bilateral economic ties, particularly through the Algerian Business Renewal Council and the Algerian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She said she would report the results of her visit to President Emmanuel Macron, urging him to take the first steps towards Algeria. She also plans to contact the head of France's employees organization to encourage him to visit Algeria and the resumption of business ties. Royal called for a review of existing partnerships and said that once the issue of historical memory and recognition is addressed, the two countries can move forward and build new cooperation. She urged France to make a gesture acknowledging colonial crimes in Algeria, including the return of cultural artifacts and human remains, the opening of archives, and progress on the issue of French nuclear tests in the Sahara.
Monsieur Macron, mais je pense que le premier geste qu'il doit faire, c'est la restitution des biens culturels et des archives.
I think that the first action that Mr. Macron should do is return cultural artifacts and archives. It can be done in 24 hours, it can be done very quickly. All he has to do is deposit them in the appropriate places, so it can be done very quickly. So I'm going to try to convince him to take this step, because it's not just about returning objects, you see, it's deeper than that. Returning objects that belong to Algeria is a sign of recognition of what happened, and in a way we are fortunate to have these objects and to have the capacity to make a gesture. They haven't been destroyed, they have been preserved, so let's return them. That's really the first step that should be done on a state-to-state basis.
Le premier geste qui doit être fait, d'État à État.
Meanwhile, Ségolène Royal noted recent advances, such as the French Senate's approval of a law on the restitution of cultural property and a parliamentary amendment requiring the government to disclose information on the consequences of nuclear tests within 6 months. Finally, Royal stated that France must take the first step as the former colonial power, and said hostile reactions to her stance reflect fear of historical truth. She also welcomed the Algerian Justice Minister Lotfi Boujma for taking the decision to allow her to visit, at her request, French journalist Christophe Guilez, detained by Algeria, describing it as a positive signal, including a successful visit.
Media sources have revealed the involvement of the current French Minister of Culture, Rachida Dati, in a hostile campaign against Algeria. She is said to be among the direct officials responsible for the broadcast by the French public television channel France France 2 of the so-called investigation containing false allegations and misinformation with content hostile to Algeria. According to an investigation aired Thursday evening by Algerian television titled France, Media and Propaganda, Rachida Dati was identified as being among the direct figures behind the dissemination on France 2 of lies and fabrications included in this anti-Algeria content in line with her orientations. Algerian television source confirmed her involvement in the Media Council, a scandal which will leave a lasting mark of disgrace on the French public media. The same source described Rachida Dati as a Franco-Marxian figure, portraying her as someone who has carried over resentment inherited from the Marxian regime to implement a suspicious agenda against everything relating to Algeria, adding that she has turned French public media into an instrument serving internal political failure, fueled by hatred and hostility, and reflecting what it describes as a psychological imbalance marked by obsession and an instability or an inability to tolerate the emergence of a free and thriving Algeria. The investigation further stressed or stated that Rachida Dati, known in French political circles as a traitor for her skill in applying deceit and betrayal even against her political allies, nevertheless finds time to direct her hostility toward a sovereign state. This, it notes, occurs while she faces serious evidence implicating her in corruption and embezzlement of public funds dating back to her tenure as Minister of Justice. Shifting now to the Middle East, where the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stressed the need to fully implement the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip. Speaking at a press conference on Thursday, Guterres said the ceasefire in Gaza is currently described as a de-escalation in firing without a complete halt. He emphasized the need to move to the second phase, which would entail the full withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces and pave the way for the implementation of the two-state solution. The Secretary General said the primary responsibility for international peace and security lies with the UN Security Council, noting that it is the only body empowered to adopt decisions binding on all parties and to authorize the use of force under international law. Guterres also reaffirmed his strong opposition to all efforts by Israel to undermine the two-state solution, particularly in the West Bank through the construction of settlements, demolitions, forced displacement, and colonist violence. He stressed the need to hold these practices and to create conditions that would allow Gaza and the West Bank, including East Al-Quds, to form the future state of Palestine. Let's listen to him.
We have in Gaza a ceasefire that a very distinguished journalist has classified recently as a lesser fire, which means it's a ceasefire, but the fire goes on. We must have a ceasefire in Gaza. And we must move with the second stage fully, which means full withdrawal of Israeli forces, decommissioning of armed groups, and also to pave the way to the two-state solution to finally become a reality.
Meanwhile, 2 Palestinians were killed early on Friday in an airstrike or Israeli airstrike on Al Maghazi refugee camp in the central part of the Gaza Strip, while a Palestinian teenager sustained an injury from Israeli army fire in Beit Omar town, north of the occupied West Bank city of Al Khalil. Another 6 Palestinians were injured earlier today when Israeli forces shelled a tent of displaced people in the Al Mawasi area, west of Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. This came as Israeli occupation forces handed over the bodies of 15 Palestinian martyrs from the Gaza Strip, which they had been holding as part of a prisoner exchange deal with the Palestinian resistance days after the Israeli army found the body of the last captured soldier in the Strip. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned that international cooperation is eroding in the world during a media briefing where he took aim at one or two powerful countries undermining efforts to solve global problems collectively. In his annual address as Secretary General, where he outlined priorities for the UN, Guterres said on Thursday that the world body stood ready to help members do more to address their most pressing issues, including the climate catastrophe, inequality, conflict, and the rising influence of technology companies. But he warned that global problems will not be solved by one power alone calling the shots, in apparent reference to United States President Donald Trump's administration and his move to abandon much of the UN system while also impelling countries to join his newly created Board of Peace. Guterres went on to say that two powers would also not solve key problems by carving the world into rival spheres of influence, in what appeared to be a reference to Guterres, who will step down from his position at the end of the year, underscore the UN's ongoing commitment to international law amid concerns that treaties which countries have abided by for decades are coming undone. Let's listen to Mr. Guterres.
Глобальні проблеми не будуть вирішені однією державою, яка керує процесом. Їх також не вирішать дві держави, які
And finally, 10 U.S. warships, including a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, are reportedly deployed near Iran as Washington demands that Iran enter into negotiations over its nuclear program. The U.S. administration under President Donald Trump sent the fleet headed by the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln to the area following mass protests in Iran. The size of the fleet matches the one deployed to waters including the Caribbean in relation to the U.S. military operation earlier this month in Venezuela. This came as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated or expressed gratitude to Turkey for standing by Iran during the terrorist incidents that had occurred in the country and which had been orchestrated by Israeli entities. Speaking at the joint press conference with his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan in Istanbul, Araghchi pointed out that Iran and Turkey are both neighbors and friends, and their relations have been fraternal throughout history, reiterating support for Turkey's approach to defending the region by safeguarding its interests and expressing Iran's readiness for all diplomatic processes and in favor of a fair negotiation process. For his part, Fidan underlined that resuming nuclear negotiations with Iran or between Iran and the United States, on a constructive basis is of vital importance for reducing regional tension. And with this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our weekly program with my colleagues Aziz Agassi and Asya Bakar. As for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Thank you and goodbye.
Welcome to this fresh edition of Inspiring Figures. Today we'll shed light on an undisputed master of ethno-pop, multicultural Algerian ambassador and one of the pioneers of the first hour of world music. He likes to surprise, innovate and disrupt by force of will and talent. It has become over time a reference of the Algerian and North African music. I'm talking, of course, about the legend Hamid Baroudi.